Hello and welcome to my class assignment, Report on the Social Web, Rules of Play of the Social Web, where we will be talking about 5 principles, which are transparency and creating trust, crowdsourcing, freemium, and personalization. I will be providing sources by showing a tag in the video and providing links in the description of the video. All of these principles sort of interconnect, as you'll see, especially towards the end. But I'm going to start with transparency and creating trust, which I'll handle together because they are very linked. In the book Engage, Solis writes, "Transparency is openness, but it's irrelevant without a cause to champion or the ability to convey empathy." Further, he writes, "Authenticity and transparency are the minimum requirements in any exchange, online and in the real world. If authority, trust, and loyalty are what we strive for, then authenticity and transparency do not, in or of themselves, attain our goals. Authority, trust, loyalty, and their ability to inspire activity are earned gradually through every exchange where those involved are informed as a result of their participation." Up until that point, I kind of agreed, but then I read the word mindshare, remembered that we live in a capitalist hellscape, and used the Cambridge Dictionary to get the definitions of the rest and some other sources before my head imploded. I grew up on social media, and it's no exaggeration to say that there were times that almost all of my social interactions outside of school happened on the internet. So I am quite positive to social media in general, and as such I've tried to include positive examples throughout this podcast with mixed success. But I want to start with 2 examples that I really find are positive, and that's playvicious.social and mastodon.art. They're both part of the Fediverse, which is social media except connected like email. So if you think like it's similar to Twitter in its shape, and then except that you can have your own server and still talk to other servers. So for example, mastodon.art is connected to playvicious.social, and mastodon.art is mostly focused on art and art-related discussions, and playvicious.social is more general. And the users are on separate servers, but they can still interact. I should mention that I'm a moderator of .art, so I'm a little bit biased when it comes to portraying mastodon.art in a positive light. There are certain instances where we could do better. Of course, we can always do better. But I think we're doing a good job at being open and following through on our actions. And generally, our users seem to trust us. And recently, we, for example, had our admin announced some potential upcoming changes and wanted feedback, and people are participating in the conversation and seem to be generally happy with what we are thinking about. I am an admirer of playvicious.social. I feel like the admins and mods are unapologetically themselves, and they have a strong stance against bigotry and of all types, and they're actually enforcing their policy, and they are not backing down. I mean, they're always open to conversation, which is also really cool. Like, they won't debate on certain things like human beings' fundamental value, but they will be open to admitting that they've made mistakes and discussing those. And it's really inspiring to see people actually standing up for the terms of service and codes of conduct that they set up and enforcing them properly, unlike so many bigger social media platforms. And Ro in particular, the admin of Playvicious.social, is working on a new media platform that will continue on in the same spirit, because there's some issues with how Mastodon is being handled that, well, obviously everyone isn't always agreeing on everything, so Ro is going to make a new platform for sharing media of, I think, all kinds of different types that will also continue in the same spirit of Playvicious.social, focusing on making sure that people are safe and are free to express themselves. And I'm really excited about this because there's so many bad and sometimes not necessarily, they're not necessarily like meaning to do bad, but they're like incompetent and cause harm anyway. And there's so many of them in that control online spaces, as we'll find out as we keep going through this. Let's move on to ICANN. What? Aren't we going to talk about Facebook or Google or Amazon? Okay, here we go. They are bad. Next. So much is already being said about them, and don't worry, they're involved everywhere anyway, and we will mention them later again. But ICANN is a current example that isn't being talked about as much. And let's begin with asking, what is ICANN? ICANN essentially has power over how the internet works through their control over the domain name system. And right now, ICANN is in the process of trying to sell .org under secrecy and unethical and possibly illegal means, which could lead to giant price hikes for non-profit organizations who use the .org domain to host their websites. And if people aren't paying attention, then they might end up with a huge bill for renewing their websites. And ICANN they haven't been saying much online about it. They're not being transparent at all. They have a Twitter feed and a Facebook feed where they update regularly, but they haven't really mentioned the .org thing for quite a while now, and they are ignoring direct questions on Facebook. The California Attorney General has actually sent ICANN a letter asking for responses to quite a few questions, and I haven't seen them respond to that. They definitely aren't making any noise about this investigation happening. And the latest I've seen about them is that, at the time of recording, is that there is a February deadline at which point ICANN is expected to give response, but they are pushing for a delay until April. They are basically not being transparent or trustworthy at all. And to really underline this, the company that they are selling or trying to sell .org to is called Ethos Capital, which basically just sounds like a film villain company. And we will get back to them because they also have already funded two companies called AdHark and VidMob, which will be perfect examples when we get to the theme of personalization. But first, let's move on to crowdsourcing. Crowdsourcing is defined as the activity of giving tasks to a large group of people or to the general public, for example, by asking for help on the internet. And one very famous example that probably doesn't really need an introduction is Wikipedia. Wikipedia is an online encyclopedia where anyone can contribute. Solis writes that relevant information, consistency, and insight are the attributes of those who build credibility among their peers. Wikipedia builds credibility by having editors that have the power to control and revise pages to make sure that they stay accurate and follow Wikipedia's principles. That doesn't mean that we should use Wikipedia as a source for serious works, as it could still be inaccurate due to people just making mistakes or, in some cases, vandalism. But in everyday context, we do kind of trust Wikipedia to be correct. And we can use it to find other sources to actually read and take material from instead. Another smaller example of crowdsourcing is a whale's lantern. A whale's lantern brings independent musicians together to create music in randomly assigned pairs. They make different music albums every now and then, and the themes so far have been portraits, school, the element, and music from a different planet. Their albums are pay what you want with no minimum, so you can get them for free as well. It's just a thing that some people do for fun, to just make music together. I think it's a really neat project. Speaking of free, let's move on to Freemium. Freemium is a way of charging for a product or service in which the basic product or service is free, but the customer pays for extra features. I try a lot of free-to-play games, especially on mobile, because it's so easy to just do it. But I rarely play anything for more than a week at most, for a couple of reasons. Number 1. Often you get what you pay for, which in this case is nothing, really. 2. In most of these games you hit a point where you can't really progress anymore if you don't pay, and the games are just not good enough to pay for. 3. Aggressive pushing to spend money through pop-ups, alerts, and banners. And 4. If you don't get that, you get ads. Ads, 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 ads everywhere. Now, there are a couple of games that are freemium games that I have played for quite a long time. One of them is Love Live School Idol Festival, which was a rhythm game with songs from a franchise that I really enjoyed. But the company that handles the English version of the game kind of sucks, and they didn't really provide as good service as the other versions of the game. And after a while I also generally got bored with the franchise, so I stopped with that game, even though I haven't really found another rhythm game that I like quite as much yet. The other game that I played for a while but had to stop was Love Nikki, and I had to stop that one because I actually started spending money on it. While I never got close to, Whale, I knew that now was the time to get out. Because a lot of these games really trap you into cycles of continuous spending as soon as you start spending. And one large and influential game among kids that does this a lot is Fortnite. Now, Folding Ideas has made a video called Manufactured Discontent and Fortnite, which explains this a lot better than I do and in a lot more depth than I could since I haven't played the game. But the basics of it is that you can't play Fortnite for free, but if you do, everything around you is reminding you that you haven't spent money on it, and therefore you're not getting as much out of it as everybody else. And since this game is particularly marketed towards children, I find it very very distasteful, to say the least. Like, there's a lot of games that push people to spend money on things that aren't really worth it in the end, but Fortnite doing it specifically to children and so aggressively makes it a particularly bad example in my book. Now, I did say that I was going to try to keep things positive a bit in this assignment, but just as I picked out an example of a positive game so far, which is Fire Emblem Heroes, they went and introduced a paywall. So until this point, Fire Emblem Heroes has been relatively accessible without paying, and everything has been individually achievable. You wouldn't have probably gotten everything ever, but there's so much content and you technically are able to get everything without spending money. and it was a fun base game, so I played it for quite a while. I still do. Fire Emblem Heroes is a gacha game, and it wants you to pay for orbs, and they announce promotions, but it's not as in your face consistently and constantly on every page, unlike other games that I've played. And like I mentioned, until this point, it has been possible to achieve everything, but literally during the time I was doing this assignment, they announced a new feature. And the new feature is called the Fe Pass. And it's a pass that's a monthly subscription with exclusive characters that you won't get unless you pay. And some quality of life features, like you get increased stats, you get to rewind battles and try again without spending more resources, and you get to automatically go through stages to get items without needing to spend as much time and effort on them. And these are features that will significantly help people who actually pay for the game to be better than the people who don't pay for the game. And what makes people more angry than the average mobile game is that the annual cost of the pass could buy you 2 entire games from the Fire Emblem series in their entirety for a console, basically. So like one annual pass for this game with just a few things extra is more than a Netflix subscription. And that's a significant amount of money for a mobile game. So that's why people are upset and why we should not trust freemium games especially, but also other services. And now we're at the final principle, personalization. One-to-one marketing, also called relationship marketing or customer relationship management, and also personalization, means being willing and able to change your behavior toward an individual customer based on what the customer tells you and what else you know about that customer. Now, personal recommendations from friends can be nice. They know you and they probably know what you like. And if the person in a local bakery knows that you like chocolate because you've shopped there for years and they recommend a new chocolate cake, that can be nice. But that is not what is meant with personalization over social media. It's one thing to train sales staff to be warm and attentive. It's quite another to identify, track, and interact with an individual customer and then reconfigure your product or service to meet that customer's needs. At the end of January came a video that perfectly encapsulated how I feel when I try to talk about personalization and how it's achieved, because that is through data.
I don't want my data being captured and sent somewhere. It doesn't go anywhere. The sign says the data may be shared with the Metropolitan Police or other trusted partners. It says maybe, won't be.
Can we get in, please?
Yeah, alright, pet. Look, it's just to protect your safety, isn't it? It's just the way of the world. I'm not safe if I'm being surveilled against my will. Well, then you can safely piss off.
And this is how we come back to VidMob and AdHark and Ethos and ICANN. Because VidMob and AdHark are both companies that try to achieve personalization within advertisement using AI. And that is based on data that is being collected in many ways unknowingly and without consent from everyone visiting websites that have any sort of connection with Google. And even not counting Ethos directly, apparently supporting and funding these companies, their privacy policy already is just a lie, because it says that they are the only ones who get access to the data collected through their website, which is supposedly limited. But with just my basic ad blocker, you can tell that there are other companies involved here trying to collect data through this site. And we can't really talk about personalization without mentioning Google, or specifically Alphabet, the parent company, and Facebook and Amazon, because their lack of transparency in what data they collect and for what purposes they use it creates a power imbalance.
I mean, say I spy on you every night in your flat, and you never find out, and it never does you any harm or anything, but in that scenario, we are not equal, because I've got everything on you, but you've got nothing on me.
Most likely you have also, at some point, written or said something, and the next thing you know, you're getting ads for that thing. Maybe in another app, or maybe just on another web page, but it's the exact thing you were talking about. Well, it's because Zuckerberg, Bezos, and Pichai are taking turns hiding under your bed. No, I'm just kidding. Except if you sleep with your phone, they're actually in bed with you at all times. According to an article in The Guardian, Ofcom's Adult Media Use and Attitudes Report 2014 found that 42% of internet users are happy to provide personal information online to companies as long as they get what they want in return. But do they know exactly what they're giving? And who gets that information? In many cases, you can get exact location data, for example.
Alright, what about kids? Kids? Yeah. Kids under 18 have smartphones and you can track their exact location at all times. Aye, but location data is anonymous. Not really. If I know the exact location of your phone, even if that data doesn't have your name written next to it, who else stands outside this club every Friday night? Even in a big bunch of anonymized location data, if you know anything about the person that you're trying to spy on, it's really easy to pick them out. And that's my point. Like, if it's sinister to do it to children, why is it less sinister to do it to adults?
What if organizations like ICANN, with power over the entire internet through companies like Ethos, enables Google to collect information on you that is then used by AdHark to push ads to a kid on their way to school on the bus stop screen for a game with hostile monetization, like Fortnite? What if all of that, but harmful political views are being pushed to a person in power? Or to people who could hurt you for something you can't control about yourself? Like your skin color, or your sexual orientation, or where you're from. I'm really tired of people saying user-centered design, but meaning, how can we make it convenient for users to be exploited for our gain? As designers or business owners, it might be legal, profitable, and convenient to use these services or to create others based on the same models. But please think twice before exploiting others. If not for their sake, if you don't care about other people, to stop the normalization of the system and help yourself. It might be common to do this, but it's not okay.